Welcome to Myths of the Night. Ancient stories told in whispers to guide you into calm and peaceful rest. Here, the myths of old are retold in calm voices to help you rest, reflect, and dream. In the depths of winter, when icy winds howl across dark waters and storms batter the coasts of Greece, there arrives a peculiar phenomenon. For 14 days, the seas grow mysteriously calm. The waves settle into gentle ripples. The winds die down to soft whispers. Sailors who have weathered countless tempests know these days well, calling them the halcyon days, a gift of peace in winter's fury. But few remember the tragic love story that gave birth to this blessing, a tale of devotion so profound that even death could not sever its bonds. This is the story of Alcyone and Ceyx, two souls whose love for each other burned so brightly that it caught the attention of the gods themselves. It is a story that begins with laughter and joy, descends into heartbreak and despair, and rises again into something beautiful and eternal. It speaks to the deepest parts of the human heart, those chambers where love and loss intertwine, where grief transforms into grace, and where endings become new beginnings. The ancient Greeks understood that the greatest stories were not simply entertainment, but reflections of profound truths about existence itself. In the myth of Alcyone and Ceyx, they wove together themes of hubris and humility, divine justice and divine mercy, the power of nature and the resilience of love. Through the centuries, their tale has echoed across cultures, inspiring poets, artists, and dreamers who recognize in this ancient myth something timeless and universal. Before we can understand the tragedy that befell these lovers, we must first come to know them in their happiness, in those golden days before fate's cruel turn. We must see them as they were in the kingdom of Trachis, ruling with wisdom and grace, devoted not only to each other, but to their people, and to the sacred duties of hospitality that marked the truly noble in ancient Greece. Alcyone was born of divine lineage, daughter of the mighty Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Her father dwelled in a floating palace where the 4 great winds were imprisoned in vast caves, released only at the command of Zeus himself. Aeolus controlled Boreas, the fierce north wind that brought winter's bite, Zephyrus, the gentle west wind of spring, Notus, the stormy south wind, and Eurus, the unlucky east wind. This was no small responsibility, for the winds could bring both bounty and destruction, calm seas for fishermen, or tempests that swallowed entire fleets. Growing up in such a household, Alcyone learned early about the raw power of nature, the thin line between order and chaos that her father maintained through divine authority. She watched the winds strain against their imprisonment, howling to be free, and she understood that even gods must respect forces they cannot fully control. This knowledge would serve as a dark prophecy, though she could not know it then, living as she did in the brightness of youth and love. Her mother was a narrated, and together they raised Alcyone alongside her siblings in a world where mortal and divine intermingled freely. She was no ordinary princess, but a being who straddled two worlds, neither fully mortal nor fully divine, blessed and cursed by her mixed heritage. The blood of gods flowed in her veins, granting her wisdom and insight beyond her years. Yet she remained vulnerable to all the sorrows that afflict humanity. When Alcyone came of age, her beauty was renowned throughout the Greek lands. But it was not merely physical beauty that drew admirers. It was the grace of her spirit, the kindness in her eyes, the wisdom in her words. She possessed that rare quality that marks true nobility, a genuine concern for others that transcended rank and privilege. Many sought her hand, princes and heroes alike, but her heart remained untouched until she met Ceyx. Ceyx was the king of Trachis, a city-state nestled in the rugged landscape of central Greece. His father was Eosphorus, known to the Romans as Lucifer, not the fallen angel of later Christian tradition, but the morning star, the bright planet Venus that heralds the dawn. This heritage marked Ceyx as special, for he carried the light of heaven in his bloodline. Some accounts name his mother as Philonis, though the ancient sources disagree on this detail, as they disagree on much. Like Alcyone, Ceyx walked in two worlds. Though he ruled a mortal kingdom, divine light illuminated his path. He was known throughout Greece as a just and peaceful king, a ruler who preferred diplomacy to warfare, prayer to violence. When refugees arrived at his borders, fleeing persecution or natural disaster, he welcomed them with open arms. The great hero Peleus found sanctuary in Trachis after being exiled from Aegina. Even the mighty Heracles had connections to the region, and Ceyx briefly sheltered the children of Heracles when they were pursued by vengeful enemies. This generosity and compassion were not weaknesses, but the truest form of strength. In an age when kings measured their greatness by the size of their armies and the territories they conquered, Ceyx chose a different path. He understood that true power lay not in domination, but in justice, not in fear, but in respect. His people loved him, not because they had to, but because he gave them reason to. When Alcyone and Ceyx met, it was as if two stars collided, creating a brilliance that outshone everything around them. The ancient sources do not tell us the details of their first encounter, whether it was at a festival, a diplomatic gathering, or by chance along a mountain road. But we know the result: a love so immediate and overwhelming that both recognized in the other their missing half, the completion of their soul. Their courtship must have been a wonder to behold. Two beings of such grace and nobility, walking together through gardens, speaking late into the night about philosophy and dreams, discovering in each other not just attraction, but true understanding. In a world where political marriages were the norm, where alliances were forged through matrimonial contracts, and love was considered a pleasant bonus rather than a requirement, Alcyone and Ceyx were blessed with both love and an appropriate match. They married amid great celebration, and their wedding was attended by mortals and immortals alike. The gods themselves smiled upon this union, seeing in it a reflection of the harmony they wished for the world. Two souls of mixed heritage, divine and mortal blood flowing together, ruling with wisdom and devotion, it seemed like a match ordained by the fates themselves. And for a time, it was paradise. Trachis flourished under their joint rule. Alcyone brought her father's blessing, ensuring that favorable winds filled the sails of merchant ships and gentle rains nourished the crops. Ceyx administered justice with fairness and ruled with a gentle hand. Together, they were the embodiment of what governance should be, not the exercise of power over others, but the fulfillment of responsibility to others. Their palace became known throughout Greece as a place of culture and refinement. Poets came to recite their verses. Philosophers debated in the courtyards. Artists found patronage and encouragement. But more than this, it was known as a place of genuine love, where the king and queen were not merely partners in rulership, but partners in life, devoted to each other with a depth of feeling that seemed to defy mortal limitations. The ancient sources vary on whether they had children. Some accounts mention a son named Hippasus, who would become a warrior and ally of Heracles in the war against Oechalia, though other sources attribute this Hippasus to a different king of Trachis, also named Ceyx. The mythological tradition sometimes conflates these two figures, making it unclear whether the devoted husband of Alcyone is the same Ceyx who befriended Heracles. Regardless, the ancient sources focus primarily on the relationship between husband and wife, for it was this bond that would ultimately define their legacy. Yet even in their happiness, the threads of fate were weaving toward an ending they could not foresee. Alcyone and Ceyx were so completely devoted to each other, so wrapped up in their love, that it seemed nothing could ever separate them. They ruled their kingdom with wisdom, welcomed strangers with generosity, and honored the gods with appropriate sacrifices. By all appearances, they had earned the favor of Olympus and the blessings of fortune. But in the ancient world, happiness itself could be dangerous. The Greeks understood that fate was capricious, that prosperity could turn to tragedy in an instant, that the very height of joy made the fall into sorrow, all the more devastating. No hubris was necessary, no offense against the divine. Sometimes, tragedy simply came, as inevitable as winter following autumn, as certain as death following life. The first shadow fell upon their happiness when Ceyx's brother Daedalion met a terrible fate. His brother Daedalion had suffered a terrible fate. Daedalion's daughter, Chione, had been beautiful enough to attract the attention of both Apollo and Hermes. Made arrogant by her beauty and by bearing divine children, she had foolishly claimed to be more beautiful than Artemis herself. The virgin goddess of the hunt had responded by shooting her with an arrow, ending her life instantly. Daedalion, driven mad by grief for his daughter, had attempted to throw himself from the heights of Mount Parnassus. Apollo, taking pity on him at the last moment, had transformed him into a hawk, a bird of prey that now haunted the high peaks, forever hunting, forever restless. The transformation was a mercy of sorts, but it left Ceyx devastated. His brother was lost to him, neither truly dead nor truly alive, existing now in an animal form that could never speak, never embrace, never share the bonds of family. As if this tragedy were not enough, new troubles arose. A monstrous wolf began attacking the countryside around Trachis, slaughtering cattle and killing herdsmen. This was no ordinary wolf, but a creature sent by the sea nymph Psamathe, who sought vengeance against Peleus for the murder of her son Phocus years before. The beast was enormous, with eyes that glowed red in the darkness and jaws strong enough to crush bone like kindling. Ceyx found himself besieged by disasters he could not understand. Why was his kingdom, which had been so prosperous and peaceful, suddenly beset by supernatural calamities? What had he done to deserve such misfortune? In his distress, he made the decision that would seal his fate. He would travel across the Aegean Sea to consult the oracle of Apollo at Claros in Ionia. Normally, Greeks seeking divine guidance would travel to Delphi, where the most famous oracle resided, breathing vapors that induced prophetic visions and speaking the words of Apollo himself. But Delphi was currently inaccessible, blocked by the warlord Phorbas and his Phlegian followers. So Ceyx would have to make the longer, more dangerous journey to Claros, crossing the unpredictable Aegean Sea. When Alcyone learned of her husband's plan, a chill ran through her body that had nothing to do with the weather. Every instinct screamed at her that this was wrong, that terrible danger awaited on the waves. She who had grown up in her father's palace, who had seen the winds struggle against their restraints, who understood better than any mortal the sea's capacity for destruction. She knew with a certainty beyond reason that Ceyx should not make this voyage. She found him in their chambers, making preparations for the journey, selecting offerings to bring to the oracle, speaking with his advisors about the governance of Trachis in his absence. When she entered, he smiled at her, that warm, loving smile that had always melted her heart. But this time, she could not return it. Fear had frozen her features into a mask of dread. She went to him, taking his hands in hers, feeling their warmth and strength. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, memorizing every detail of his face, as if some part of her already knew this might be her last chance. Then she spoke, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. She begged him not to go. She reminded him that she was Aeolus's daughter, that she had grown up surrounded by the winds, and she knew their treacherous nature. Even her father, a god specifically tasked with controlling these forces, could not always contain them. The winds were elemental powers, older than the Olympians, and they chafed against any restraint. When they broke free, they showed no mercy to the ships and sailors caught in their fury. She described to him the wreckage she had seen washed ashore, splintered timbers that had once been proud vessels, bodies bloated and pale, pulled from the waves. She spoke of the wives and mothers who waited on the docks, watching the horizon with desperate hope, only to receive the news that their loved ones would never return. She painted a picture so vivid and terrible that anyone else might have reconsidered their plans. But Ceyx was troubled in his soul. The death of his brother, the mysterious wolf, the sense that divine displeasure hung over his kingdom. All these things weighed upon him. He needed answers, needed guidance, needed to understand what he had done wrong so he could make it right. He tried to reassure Alcyone, speaking of his experienced crew, the quality of his ship, the favor of the gods that had always protected Trachis. When she saw that her warnings were not swaying him, Alcyone changed her approach. If he must go, then she would go with him. Whatever dangers awaited on the sea, they would face them together. If the waves claimed him, they would claim her too. If he returned safely, they would share the joy of homecoming. She would not, could not, remain behind while he sailed into danger. But Ceyx refused. He loved her too much to risk her life on this journey. The very thought of Alcyone caught in a storm, the waves dragging her down, her beautiful face turned pale with death, it was unbearable. No, she must stay safe in Trachis. If anything happened to him, the kingdom would need her leadership. Their son would need his mother. And besides, he had no intention of dying at sea. He would be careful. He would make appropriate sacrifices. He would return before 2 full moons had passed. He swore this to her, invoking his father Eosphorus, the morning star. By the light that heralded each dawn, he promised he would return. If the fates allowed it, if the gods showed mercy, he would come back to her arms. This was not goodbye forever, merely a temporary parting. They had endured separations before, when duty called him to visit neighboring kingdoms or settle disputes in distant parts of his realm. This would be no different. But both of them knew it was different. Alcyone could feel it in her bones, a dread that went beyond rational fear, and Ceyx, though he tried to hide it, felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him. Still, he was a king, and kings must do their duty even when their hearts rebel against it. He kissed her tenderly, tasted the salt of her tears, held her close, and breathed in her scent, fixing it in his memory. The next morning, the ship was prepared. The crew assembled at the docks, experienced sailors who had navigated these waters many times before. They loaded supplies, checked the rigging, made sacrifices to Poseidon for safe passage. The ship itself was well built, painted in bright colors, with a carved prow and strong oars for when the wind failed. Alcyone came to see him off, though every step toward the harbor felt like walking toward her own execution. She stood on the dock as Ceyx boarded the ship, as the crew took their positions, as the mooring lines were released. She raised her hand in farewell, and he stood at the stern, waving back to her, his figure growing smaller as the ship moved out into the harbor. She watched until she could no longer make out his features, then continued watching the ship itself until it was merely a speck on the horizon. Even when her eyes could no longer track the vessel, she remained there, staring out at the endless expanse of gray-green water, as if she could hold him safe through the power of her love and will alone. Finally, when the sun began to set and servants came to gently escort her back to the palace, she allowed herself to be led away. She returned to their chambers, to the bed they had shared, to the rooms that still held his presence in every object and shadow. She lay down, but sleep would not come. Instead, she prayed, lighting incense and making offerings to Hera, queen of the gods, protectress of marriage, asking her to watch over Ceyx and bring him safely home. She did not know that the goddess she prayed to had heard her pleas and was moved by them. She did not know that Hera, who knew so much about the pain of loving someone who was often absent, felt a stirring of compassion for this mortal woman. And she certainly did not know that her prayers had come too late, that even as she knelt before Hera's altar, the punishment Zeus had waited to deliver was already in motion. The first day of the voyage was uneventful. The winds were favorable, the sea calm. The crew sang working songs as they pulled at the oars, keeping time with the rhythm of their strokes. Ceyx stood at the bow, watching the coastline recede, breathing deeply of the salt air. Perhaps Alcyone's fears had been unfounded after all. Perhaps this journey would be quick and safe, and he would return to her with the oracle's wisdom and peace restored to his troubled soul. But as the sun dipped below the horizon on the second day, the sky began to change. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed, dark masses that swallowed the stars one by one. The wind, which had been steady and gentle, started to gust erratically, first from one direction, then another, as if the air itself had become confused and angry. The crew noticed the change immediately. Experienced sailors could read the sky like scholars read scrolls, and what they saw filled them with dread. The captain ordered the sails furled, the cargo secured, everything battened down in preparation for the coming storm. Men who had laughed and joked earlier in the day now worked in grim silence, their movements quick and efficient. Then the storm hit with a fury that seemed almost supernatural in its intensity. The winds, which had been manageable moments before, suddenly became violent beyond reason. The winds, which Aeolus had kept carefully controlled, burst forth with unprecedented violence. North wind and south wind collided in screaming conflict. East wind and west wind joined the battle, creating vortices of air that had no natural pattern, no predictable direction. The sea, responding to this atmospheric violence, rose up in mountains of water that dwarfed the small ship tossing upon them. Imagine, if you can, the terror of that moment. One instant, you're on a sturdy vessel beneath a clouded but navigable sky. The next, the world has dissolved into chaos. Rain falls so hard, it feels like needles against exposed skin. The wind howls with a sound like the screaming of demons. Lightning illuminates massive waves that tower over the ship, each one tall enough to engulf a building. And they come from every direction at once. The ship rose on one wave, climbing what felt like a vertical wall of water. The deck tilting at such an impossible angle that men had to cling to ropes and rigging to avoid sliding into the sea. Then they would reach the crest, have one sickening moment suspended between sky and sea, before plunging down the other side, the ship's bow diving into the trough between waves with enough force to shake every timber. Water poured over the deck with each wave, turning the ship into a barely floating island, more water than wood. The crew bailed desperately, but for every bucket they threw overboard, the sea sent 10 more to replace it. The sails, which they had tried to furl, were torn away by the wind, the canvas shredding like paper. The mast itself cracked and groaned under the strain, threatening to snap and bring the whole structure crashing down onto the deck. Men screamed prayers to every god whose name they knew. Some called upon Poseidon, lord of the sea, begging him to calm his realm. Others prayed to Zeus, not knowing that it was his anger that had created this tempest. A few, perhaps realizing the futility of prayer in such circumstances, simply held on to whatever was solid and hoped to survive the next wave. And then the one after that, taking life one moment at a time, because thinking beyond the immediate present was impossible. Ceyx, standing near what remained of the ship's steering apparatus, found that all his kingly authority, all his divine heritage, meant nothing in the face of nature's wrath. He was as helpless as the youngest sailor, as vulnerable as any mortal who has ever faced the sea's fury. The knowledge of his impotence hit him harder than any wave. But in that moment of terror, when death seemed not just possible but inevitable, his thoughts turned not to his own survival, but to the woman he had left behind. Alcyone's name was on his lips with each prayer, with each gasping breath between waves. The thought of her filled him with simultaneous joy and agony. Joy because he had known such love. Agony because he was about to be torn from it forever. He thought of her face as he had last seen it, streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. He remembered how right she had been to be afraid, how he should have listened to her warnings. Her knowledge of the winds born from growing up as Aeolus's daughter, had been accurate. But he had been too determined, too convinced that duty required this journey. Now that determination would cost him everything. A wave larger than any before rose up like a liquid mountain, its crest curling over itself with a sound like thunder. Ceyx had just enough time to realize what was coming before it fell upon the ship with the weight of a collapsing building. The vessel, which had somehow survived every previous assault, finally succumbed to this ultimate blow. The wood splintered with sounds like bones breaking. The deck fractured. The ship, which had been a coherent vessel moments before, disintegrated into debris, scattering planks, cargo, and crew across the churning water. Men who had been sailors became swimmers, became corpses in a matter of seconds, dragged down by the weight of their soaked clothing or battered, senseless, by floating wreckage. Ceyx was thrown into the water, the cold shock of it driving the air from his lungs. He surfaced, gasping, and managed to grab hold of a floating plank, clinging to it with desperate strength. Around him, in flashes of lightning, he could see other survivors struggling, but the waves separated them, pulling each man into his own private battle with the sea. He knew he was dying. There would be no dramatic rescue, no convenient island appearing out of the storm. The water was too cold, the waves too violent, his strength too limited. It was only a matter of time, minutes at most, before exhaustion claimed him, and the sea pulled him down for the final time. But Ceyx made one last prayer, not for his own survival, but for Alcyone's peace. He prayed that his body would wash ashore near Trachis, so that she could find him, so that she could perform the proper funeral rites, so that his spirit could pass peacefully into the underworld, rather than wandering eternally as a restless ghost. He begged this from the gods, from Poseidon, Lord of the Sea, from any divine power that might be listening, hoping that they might show mercy, even if they had shown none in sending the storm. Then a wave, larger than thought possible, rose above him. Ceyx saw it coming, a wall of dark water, blocking out the storm-torn sky. He had time for one final thought, one last whispered word that was torn away by the wind before it could fully form. Alcyone. The wave crashed down, and King Ceyx of Trachis, son of the morning star, husband of Alcyone, was pulled beneath the surface. He struggled briefly, instinctively, but the sea was too strong, and his strength too depleted. Water filled his lungs, bringing a different kind of pain, a burning that faded quickly into numbness. his last sensation was not pain, but sorrow, a profound regret that he would never see his beloved wife again. Above the churning waves, hidden behind thick clouds, Eosphorus, the morning star, watched his son die. The divine being who brought light to herald each dawn was powerless to descend from the heavens and save the drowning king. He could only cover his radiant face with clouds, dimming his light in grief, as the waters claimed his child. Back in Trachis, Alcyone knew nothing of the catastrophe that had befallen her husband. She maintained her daily routine, ruling in Ceyx's absence with the same wisdom and grace that had marked her reign when he was present. She held audience with petitioners, settled disputes, made decisions about trade and diplomacy. But all of it felt hollow, mechanical, as if she were an actor playing the role of queen while her true self waited elsewhere. Every morning, she went to the temple of Hera and made offerings. She burned incense and poured libations, praying for Ceyx's safety and swift return. She commissioned artists to create new dedications to the goddess, spent her personal wealth on temple improvements, anything to gain divine favor for her absent husband. She counted the days, marking time until the 2 months he had promised would bring him home. She prepared for his return with meticulous care. She had his favorite foods prepared and stored. She made sure his chambers were cleaned and aired daily. She had new clothes made for him in fabrics she knew he preferred. Every detail was attended to, so that when he walked through the palace gates, everything would be perfect. A celebration of homecoming worthy of their love. But at night, when the duties of the day were done, and she lay alone in their bed, doubt crept in like fog. She would wake from troubling dreams that dissolved upon waking, leaving only a residue of dread. She would reach across the bed, expecting to find him there, and the emptiness of the cool sheets would bring tears she had to muffle in her pillow so the servants wouldn't hear. Her attendants grew worried. They saw how pale she had become, how she ate little and slept less. They saw how she would sometimes stop mid-sentence, staring at nothing, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. When they asked if she was well, she would smile and insist everything was fine, but the smile never reached her eyes. What Alcyone did not know was that her prayers had reached Hera's ears and touched the goddess's heart. The queen of Olympus, sitting in her palace on Mount Olympus, had heard every supplication, witnessed every offering, seen the depth of this mortal woman's love and devotion. And unlike her husband Zeus, whose anger had caused this tragedy, Hera felt moved to compassion. This was unusual for the goddess, who was more often depicted as jealous and vengeful, especially toward the women involved in her husband's many infidelities. But perhaps something in Alcyone's complete devotion reminded Hera of her own love for Zeus, the love that persisted despite his betrayals. Or perhaps the goddess simply recognized genuine love when she saw it and felt compelled to show mercy. But there was a problem. Alcyone continued to pray for Ceyx's safe return, making offerings and asking for his protection. These prayers were well-intentioned but futile, for Ceyx was already dead, his body floating somewhere in the Aegean, food for fish and subject to the whims of current and tide. Hera could not bring him back to life, nor would she even if she could, for Zeus's punishment had been delivered, and not even the queen of the gods could reverse her husband's judgment without causing a rift in the divine order. What Hera could do, however, was grant Alcyone the truth. She could end the woman's false hope, allow her to grieve properly, rather than waiting for a homecoming that would never arrive. It would be painful, terribly painful, but it would also be merciful in its way. The uncertainty of not knowing is sometimes worse than the certainty of loss. Hera summoned Iris, her messenger, the personification of the rainbow, who served as an intermediary between gods and mortals, between the heights of Olympus and the depths of the earth. Iris appeared before her queen, beautiful and ethereal, her form shimmering with all the colors of the spectrum, her presence a promise of connection between separate realms. Hera gave Iris a mission. She was to travel to the far edges of the earth, to a dark cave where Hypnos, the god of sleep, made his dwelling. There, she would deliver a message requesting that Hypnos send a dream to Alcyone, a dream that would reveal the truth about Ceyx's fate. But this could not be just any dream, not the confused jumble of images and sensations that typically populated mortal sleep. It had to be clear, vivid, unmistakable, so that when Alcyone woke, she would know with absolute certainty what had happened. Iris bowed to her queen and departed on her mission, traveling swifter than thought, her rainbow path arcing across the sky. She passed over mountains and seas, over cities where mortals went about their daily lives unaware of the divine drama unfolding above them, over wilderness areas where no human foot had ever trod. She flew beyond the edges of the known world, into regions where geography became strange and dreamlike. Finally, she came to the land of the Cimmerians, a place of eternal twilight, where the sun never fully rose, nor fully set. Here, shadows were permanent fixtures, and the boundary between waking and sleeping grew blurred. In this murky realm, she found the entrance to Hypnos's cave, a dark opening in the side of a mountain that seemed to swallow all light. The cave of Hypnos was unlike any mortal dwelling. No torches burned along its walls, for light would defeat its very purpose. The darkness here was not merely the absence of illumination, but a positive presence, a tangible thing that wrapped around visitors like a heavy blanket. The air itself seemed thick, laden with drowsiness, and each breath Iris took made her want to close her eyes and surrender to sleep. The cave extended deep into the earth, its passages winding downward in lazy spirals. The floors were covered with poppies, their red petals luminous even in the darkness, their narcotic scent filling every breath. These were no ordinary flowers, but the source of all sleep-inducing herbs, the original plants from which mortal poppies descended. Their roots drew sustenance from the river Lethe that flowed somewhere in the depths below, the water of forgetfulness that erased memories from souls entering the underworld. As Iris descended deeper, she passed the dreams. These were not abstract concepts, but actual beings, children of Hypnos, thousands upon thousands of them. They clung to the cave walls like sleeping bats, their forms shifting and changing, even in repose. Some appeared as beautiful visions, others as nightmares with twisted features. Some mimicked human forms so perfectly they could be mistaken for actual people, while others were abstract swirls of emotion and sensation given quasi-physical substance. Among these dreams were the three sons of Hypnos who served as their father's chief agents in the mortal world. Morpheus, whose name meant shaper or former, specialized in taking human form, appearing in dreams as recognizable people with such accuracy that dreamers often could not distinguish the dream figure from the actual person. Aeolus, also called Phobator, took the forms of animals, birds, and serpents, populating dreams with creatures both familiar and fantastical. And Phantasos created the inanimate aspects of dreams, the landscapes and buildings, the objects and phenomena that formed the stage upon which dream narratives unfolded. At the heart of the cave, in its deepest chamber, Hypnos himself reclined upon a massive couch draped with dark coverings. The god of sleep was beautiful in the way that unconsciousness is beautiful after exhaustion, a promise of rest and peace. His features were soft and gentle, his breathing slow and deep. His twin brother, Thanatos, Death himself, often visited here, for the two shared an intimate connection. Sleep was called the brother of death, and in this dark cave, one could see why. The surrender to sleep was practice for the ultimate surrender, and both gods presided over states where consciousness dissolved and the normal rules of existence no longer applied. Iris approached carefully, fighting against the overwhelming urge to lie down beside the sleeping god and abandon her mission entirely. The drowsiness that filled the cave affected even immortals, and she had to remind herself constantly of Hera's command to maintain her focus and complete her task. She called out to Hypnos, her voice seeming muted and distant even to her own ears, as if the darkness absorbed sound as readily as it absorbed light. Great Hypnos, Lord of slumber, I come as messenger of Hera, Queen of Olympus. She requires your aid. The god stirred slightly, his eyes remaining closed, but a smile touched his lips. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper that somehow filled the entire cave. Speak, Rainbow Maiden. What does the Queen of Heaven desire from the Master of Sleep? Iris explained Hera's request. Alcyone, daughter of Aeolus, wife of Ceyx, continued to pray for her husband's safe return, not knowing that he had perished in the storm. The goddess wished to show mercy by revealing the truth through a dream, clear and unmistakable, so that the grieving wife might know what had happened and begin to mourn properly. Hypnos listened, his eyes still closed, his breathing still slow and measured. When Iris finished, he was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally, he spoke. This is a task for Morpheus, my son, whose skill in assuming human form exceeds all others. He alone can appear as King Ceyx with such fidelity that Alcyone will recognize him immediately and believe the truth of what she sees. With a gesture, Hypnos summoned his son. From among the thousands of dreams clinging to the cave walls, one detached itself and drifted down to stand before the couch. Morpheus appeared as a young man of extraordinary but indefinable beauty, his features constantly shifting in subtle ways, as if he were running through all possible human appearances, ready to assume whichever was needed. Hypnos gave his son detailed instructions. He was to travel to Trachis, enter Alcyone's dreams, and appear to her as her dead husband. But this was not to be a comfortable lie or a sweet fantasy. Morpheus was to show himself exactly as Ceyx had looked at the moment of death, drowned and lifeless, so that Alcyone would understand without doubt that he was gone. The dream was to be a revelation, not a comfort, truth rather than wish fulfillment. Morpheus bowed to his father and to Iris, then dissolved into mist. He flowed up through the cave passages, past his siblings who stirred restlessly in their sleep, past the poppies and the darkness, out into the twilight of the Cimmerian lands, and then beyond. He moved swifter than thought, for dreams travel on their own logic, unbound by physical distance. In moments, he had crossed the space that had taken Iris hours to traverse. He arrived at the palace in Trachis as night deepened. The city slept, its citizens unaware of the divine visitation occurring in their midst. Morpheus entered through walls as if they were mist, following the thread of Alcyone's consciousness to her chambers. He found her asleep, though her sleep was restless, her face troubled, even in repose. She turned constantly, reaching out, as if seeking someone who was not there. Morpheus took his position at the foot of her bed and began his transformation. He assumed the exact appearance of Ceyx, not as the king had been in life, healthy and vibrant, but as he appeared now, a corpse recovered from the sea. His skin was pale and waxy, tinged with the blue of drowning. His hair hung in wet tangles, still dripping spectral seawater. His clothing was torn and sodden, clinging to his body. His eyes, which had once sparkled with intelligence and love, were now dull and fixed. The eyes of the dead. It was a horrifying sight, and Morpheus felt a moment of something like pity for the sleeping woman who would soon wake to this vision. But pity could not alter his mission. Truth, however painful, was his gift to give, and mercy sometimes wore the face of horror. He reached out with his power and entered Alcyone's dream. The confused images that had been playing through her sleeping mind, fragments of memory and anxiety woven together without coherent narrative, suddenly dissolved. They were replaced by crystal clarity, by a vision so vivid it seemed more real than reality itself. Alcyone found herself standing in a gray space, neither fully her bedroom nor any other identifiable location. A dreamscape that served as a meeting ground between mortal sleep and divine intention. And there, before her, stood Ceyx. At first, her heart leaped with joy. She ran toward him, arms outstretched, ready to embrace the husband she had missed so terribly. But as she drew closer, she saw his condition, and joy transformed instantly into horror. She stopped, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. "Ceyx?" she whispered, her dream voice trembling. "What has happened to you?" The figure of her husband looked at her with those dead eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was the voice of Ceyx, but hollow, echoing, as if coming from a great distance. Alcyone, my love, my heart, do you not recognize your husband? Do these drowned features seem so strange to you? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, though in truth, whether she wept in the dream or in her physical body or both, was impossible to say. No, this cannot be. You promised you would return. You swore by your father's light. Morpheus, speaking with Ceyx's voice, continued with terrible gentleness. I swore I would return if the fates allowed, if the gods showed mercy. They did not. The storm came upon us far from any shore. Zeus himself unleashed his wrath, and the winds your father keeps imprisoned broke free all at once. Our ship was shattered, my crew drowned, and I called your name as the waves pulled me down. Your name was the last word on my lips. Alcyone reached out toward him, but he stepped back, and she understood with dream logic that she could not touch him, that the boundary between living and dead could not be crossed even here. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would the gods do this? What did we do to deserve such punishment? Morpheus as Ceyx lowered his head. We forgot our place. We called each other by the names of Zeus and Hera, and the king of Olympus heard our presumption. This is my punishment and yours. But Alcyone, you must not continue to pray for my return. You must not make offerings for my safe voyage, for that voyage ended in death. My body floats somewhere in the Aegean, and soon it will wash upon the shore. You must find me and give me proper burial, so that my spirit may cross the Styx and find rest in the underworld. No, Alcyone said, her voice rising to a wail. No, this is a dream, only a dream. I will wake, and you will still be at sea, and you will return to me. The spectre shook his head sadly. This is a dream, yes, but it is a true dream, sent by Hera herself out of compassion for your suffering. She could not bear to see you pray uselessly, hope futilely. Better the sharp pain of certain grief than the slow agony of false hope. Remember me, Alcyone. Remember our love. But do not let that love chain you to the past. Live, my darling. Rule Trachis wisely. Raise our son to be a good man. And when your own time comes, many years hence, I will be waiting for you in the fields of Asphodel, and we will walk together once more. I cannot, Alcyone sobbed. I cannot live without you. You were my heart, my soul, my reason for breathing, If you are dead, then I am dead also. I will not, cannot, continue in a world that does not contain you." Morpheus felt the weight of her words and recognized in them a terrible determination. But his mission was to reveal truth, not to counsel the living. And he had said all that Hera had commanded him to say. The dream had served its purpose. Now it was time for Alcyone to wake. The figure of Ceyx began to fade, growing translucent, becoming mist. His final words echoed as he dissolved. "Goodbye, my love, my Alcyone, my Hera. I loved you in life. I will love you in death, forever." And then he was gone, and the dream space dissolved, and Alcyone woke. She woke screaming, lurching upright in her bed, her hands grasping at empty air where the vision of her husband had stood. The sound brought servants running, bursting into her chambers with lamps and worried faces, but Alcyone barely saw them. She was caught between two worlds, the dream still vivid in her mind's eye, reality crashing down upon her with crushing weight. "He's dead," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "Ceyx is dead, drowned at sea. The gods have taken him from me." The servants tried to comfort her, to tell her it was only a nightmare, that she should not assume the worst from a bad dream. But Alcyone shook her head violently. This had been no ordinary dream. It had the weight of truth, the unmistakable quality of divine revelation. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic or evidence, that her husband was gone. She threw off her covers and stood, swaying slightly. She pushed past the protesting servants and made her way through the palace corridors to the highest tower, the place from which she had watched Ceyx's ship sail away, the place where she had spent so many hours staring at the horizon and willing him to return. Now she climbed those stairs again, but with a different purpose. She was not looking for a returning ship, but for confirmation of her vision. As the servants trailed behind her, calling for her to come back, to rest, to wait until morning, she emerged onto the tower's platform and looked out at the sea. Dawn was breaking, and in the growing light, she could see something on the waves. At first, it was just a dark shape, bobbing in the surf near the shore. But as the light grew stronger and the object drifted closer, pushed by tide and current toward the beach below the palace, its nature became clear. It was a body, a man's body, floating face down, arms spread, carried inexorably toward land by the morning tide. Even at this distance, even unable to see the face, Alcyone knew. Some wives might have clung to doubt, might have insisted on closer examination before accepting such a terrible truth. But Alcyone had been warned by a true dream, and her heart had already acknowledged what her eyes now confirmed. She did not hesitate. She did not wait for servants to fetch the body, did not send guards to retrieve it from the surf. Instead, she ran, her feet flying down the tower stairs, through the palace corridors, out into the pre-dawn chill. She ran through the streets of the sleeping city, past startled guards at the gate, down the path that led to the beach. The servants and guards, realizing her intention, ran after her, calling for her to stop, to wait, to let them handle this. But Alcyone was beyond hearing, beyond reason. She reached the beach just as the first light of true dawn spread across the sky. The body had drifted close to shore now, caught in the shallow water where waves died in foam against the sand. She waded into the surf, her night clothes soaking through instantly, the cold water shocking against her skin. She reached the body and, with strength born of desperation, turned it over. And there, looking up at her with sightless eyes, was the confirmation of her loss. Ceyx, her husband, her love, dead and cold and gone. She pulled him to her, cradling his head against her chest, smoothing his wet hair back from his face. She kissed his cold lips, his closed eyes, his forehead, as if her love could warm him back to life. She held him as if she could anchor his spirit to his body by the force of her grief. "I'm here," she whispered to him. "I found you. You came back to me, just as you promised. You came home." The servants and guards reached the water's edge, calling to her, begging her to come back to shore, to let them bring the body, to not torture herself this way. But Alcyone was deaf to their pleas. She stood in the surf, the waves washing around her legs, holding Ceyx's lifeless form, rocking him gently as if he were a child needing comfort. And as she held him, as her tears fell upon his face, mixing with the salt water that dripped from his hair, she felt something change inside her. Her grief, which had been a wild, chaotic thing, crystallized into a single, clear intention. She could not live without him. She would not live without him. If death had separated them, then she would follow him into death, and they would be together in whatever realm awaited beyond life. She looked up at the sky, which was growing brighter with each passing moment, and she spoke not a prayer, but a declaration. "Hear me, gods of Olympus. Hear me, Zeus who sent the storm. Hear me, Poseidon who rules these waves. Hear me, Hades who guards the underworld. You have taken my husband from me, but you cannot separate our souls. Where he goes, I follow. In death, as in life, we are one. The servants on the beach watched in horror as Queen Alcyone, still holding her husband's body, began to walk deeper into the surf. The water rose to her waist, then her chest. A large wave rolled toward shore, and instead of retreating from it, she moved forward to meet it. The guards waded in after her, shouting, desperate to stop their queen from this final, irrevocable act. But they were too far behind, and she was moving with purpose, no longer the uncertain, grief-stricken woman, but someone who had found clarity in the midst of despair. She took a deep breath, preparing to dive beneath the waves, to surrender to the same element that had claimed Ceyx. She would fill her lungs with water as he had done. She would feel the same cold embrace, and then they would both be at peace, reunited in death since life had been denied them. But as she dove forward, as the water closed over her head, something miraculous happened. The gods, who had watched this tragedy unfold, who had seen the consequences of Zeus's punishment play out to its bitter conclusion, were moved to compassion. Perhaps it was Hera, who had already shown mercy by sending the dream. Perhaps it was Aeolus, Alcyone's father, who begged his fellow Olympians to show pity to his daughter. Perhaps it was even Zeus himself, who realized that his punishment had achieved its purpose, and any further suffering would be pointless cruelty. Or perhaps it was simply that the universe occasionally bends toward mercy, that the gods recognize when love is so pure and true, that it deserves not destruction, but preservation, transformation, a new form of existence that honors the depth of devotion rather than punishing it. Whatever the reason, as Alcyone dove beneath the waves, she felt her body changing. Her arms, which had been reaching forward in a swimming motion, transformed. Bones, hollowed and reshaped. Her fingers fused and extended, becoming wing feathers, each one perfect and precisely placed. Her legs compressed and reformed into bird talons. Her face pushed forward into a beak, sharp and designed for catching fish. The transformation was not painful, but felt strangely natural, as if she had always been meant for this form and had been wearing human shape only temporarily. Her perspective shifted as her eyes relocated to the sides of her head, granting her a broader field of vision. Her heartbeat accelerated to match the rapid metabolism of a bird. She broke the surface, but not as a drowning woman gasping for air. she emerged as a bird, wings beating powerfully, lifting her from the water into the sky. She was a kingfisher, her plumage brilliant blue and orange, colors as vivid as jewels in the morning light. And she was not alone. The body she had been holding underwent its own transformation. Ceyx's drowned flesh became feathers. His dead weight became lightness. His closed eyes opened, bright and aware, but with a bird's consciousness rather than a man's. He too had become a kingfisher. As beautiful as she, the pair of them perfectly matched. They circled each other in the air above the waves, their bird voices calling out in recognition and joy. Though they could no longer speak in human words, though their minds had been transformed along with their bodies into something simpler, yet also somehow more essential, they knew each other. The bond that had connected them as humans persisted in their new forms, perhaps even strengthened by being stripped down to its purest essence. The servants and guards on the beach watched in amazement as the two birds performed an aerial dance, weaving around each other, calling back and forth, their movements synchronized, as if choreographed by the gods themselves. It was immediately clear to all who witnessed it that these were not ordinary birds, but the transformed souls of their king and queen. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Alcyone and Ceyx flew together over the waves that had claimed them both. They were free now, in a way they had never been as humans, unbound by earthly responsibilities, by the weight of kingship, by the expectations and limitations of mortal existence. They would spend their days fishing in these waters, building nests together, raising young in the season of their mating. But the gods' mercy did not end with transformation. Aeolus, moved by his daughter's fate and grateful that she had been preserved in this new form, made a sacred promise. For 14 days each winter, during the time when Alcyone would build her nest and lay her eggs, he would confine all the winds. No matter how they howled and struggled, he would keep them imprisoned in his caves. The seas would grow calm, the waves settling into gentle ripples. The weather would become mild and still. These were the halcyon days, named for Alcyone, a gift from a father to his transformed daughter. Even now, millennia after the last Greeks prayed to Aeolus or believed in his power over the winds, the phenomenon persists. Each winter, there comes a period when the seas grow unexpectedly calm, when storms pause and winds die down. Sailors know these days well and give thanks for them, even if they no longer remember why such peace descends upon the winter waters. The kingfisher birds, which we call halcyons in Greek or Alcedo in Latin, remain as living monuments to this ancient love story. They nest near water, fishing in the shallows, and their bright plumage seems almost supernatural, too vivid for the natural world. When you see one darting over a stream or hovering above a pond, you are looking at descendants of divine transformation, carriers of a love that death could not end. In the years following the transformation, the story of Alcyone and Ceyx spread throughout the Greek world and beyond. It was told and retold, written and rewritten, each generation finding new meaning in the ancient tale. The poet Ovid included it in his Metamorphoses, that great collection of transformation myths, giving it the literary form that would preserve it for centuries to come. Philosophers debated its meaning. Was it a warning against hubris, a reminder that mortals must not compare themselves to gods? Was it a celebration of love so pure that even divine punishment could not destroy it? Was it evidence that the gods, despite their power, were moved by genuine devotion and could show mercy as readily as wrath? Artists painted scenes from the story, capturing the moment of Ceyx's departure, Alcyone's discovery of his body, or the miraculous transformation into birds. Sculptors carved images of the lovers in stone and bronze, immortalizing their devotion in materials that would outlast generations. Musicians composed songs and symphonies inspired by their tragedy and transcendence. But beyond art and philosophy, beyond literature and debate, the story touched something fundamental in the human heart. It spoke to anyone who had ever loved deeply, who had ever feared losing someone precious, who had ever wondered whether the bonds we forge with each other can survive death itself. The ancient Greeks understood that the greatest love stories were also the most tragic, for it is only in testing that true devotion reveals itself. Easy love, love that costs nothing and risks nothing, cannot compare to love that persists through disaster, that chooses to follow the beloved even into death. Alcyone and Ceyx loved each other with this fierce, total devotion. And their story suggests that such love is recognized and honored by the universe itself. There is something deeply comforting in this idea that love might be stronger than death, that the bonds we forge in life might persist beyond the grave, transformed but not destroyed. Whether we believe literally in gods and transformations, or read the myth as metaphor, the core truth remains. Love, at its deepest and most authentic, does not end when the heart stops beating. It continues in memory, in legacy, in the ripples it sends out into the world. The transformation of Alcyone and Ceyx into kingfishers represents this continuation. They could not remain as they were, for death is real, and its finality cannot be denied. But neither were they simply annihilated, their love erased as if it had never been. Instead, they were changed into something new, something that could continue together, flying side by side over the very waves that had once threatened to separate them forever. There is also profound meaning in the specific form they took. They became kingfishers, birds associated with water, with fishing, with the shores where land and sea meet. This was fitting for a couple whose tragedy arose from the sea, whose final reunion occurred in the surf. They would spend their transformed existence intimately connected to the element that had been both their nemesis and their salvation. The kingfisher is also notable for its parenting behavior. The male and female work together to raise their young, sharing the duties of nest building, egg incubating, and chick feeding. This partnership mirrors the equal partnership that Alcyone and Ceyx had enjoyed as rulers of Trachis, where both contributed wisdom and leadership. Their transformation preserved not just their love, but their fundamental dynamic of mutual support and cooperation. The gift of the halcyon days adds another layer of meaning to the story. Aeolus's promise to calm the winds during his daughter's nesting period shows that even transformed, even changed into birds, Alcyone retained her identity as his beloved daughter. The gods did not forget her or dismiss her as merely an animal after her transformation. Instead, they honored her new form and ensured that she could fulfill her new purpose without interference from the very winds that had killed her husband. This period of calm also serves as an annual reminder of the story, a recurring phenomenon that keeps the memory of these lovers alive. Each winter, when the halcyon days arrive and sailors give thanks for the unexpected peace, they are participating in a tradition stretching back millennia, connecting them to all those who have told and retold this tale across the ages. The story has evolved over time, taking on new meanings as it passed through different cultures and historical periods. Roman poets, like Ovid, emphasized different aspects than earlier Greek sources. Medieval Christians sometimes read the tale allegorically, seeing in the transformation a kind of resurrection, a victory over death that prefigured their own religious beliefs. Renaissance artists were drawn to the dramatic visual possibilities, the storm, the shipwreck, the grieving queen, the miraculous transformation. In more modern times, the story has been interpreted through psychological and sociological lenses. Some see it as an exploration of grief and the ways humans cope with devastating loss. Others focus on the gender dynamics, examining Alcyone's agency in choosing to follow her husband into death rather than remaining alone. Still others are interested in what the myth reveals about ancient Greek attitudes toward marriage, divine justice, and the natural world. But perhaps the most universal reading of the story is simply this: it is about the power of love to transcend circumstances, to find a way forward even when all seems lost, to transform tragedy into something beautiful. Alcyone and Ceyx lost their human lives, lost their kingdom, lost everything they had built together. Yet they did not lose each other. And in many ways, that was all that truly mattered. Their story reminds us that love is not about circumstances, but about connection, not about the specific form a relationship takes, but about the bond between souls. When everything external is stripped away, when position and power and even physical form are lost, what remains? The answer, this myth suggests, is love itself, the irreducible core of care and commitment that defines our deepest relationships. This is why the story of Alcyone and Ceyx continues to resonate thousands of years after it was first told. We may no longer believe in Zeus and Hera, in divine transformations and magical calm seas, but we still understand loss. We still know the fear of separation from those we love. We still yearn for reassurance that our most precious bonds will endure beyond death's horizon. The myth offers that reassurance, not by denying death's reality, but by asserting that love is itself a transformative force, powerful enough to create new possibilities, even in the midst of tragedy. Alcyone chose death rather than life without Ceyx. And this choice, which might seem like despair, becomes in the myth the catalyst for miraculous transformation. Her absolute refusal to accept separation opened a door to a new kind of existence, one where the lovers could remain together. There is a lesson here about the importance of commitment, about choosing love fully and completely without reservation. Alcyone did not hedge her bets, did not maintain emotional distance to protect herself from potential loss. She loved Ceyx with her whole heart, and when he died, she did not try to move on or find comfort elsewhere. Her love was total, and that totality was honored by the gods. Of course, we should not take this as advice to literally follow our deceased loved ones into death. The myth operates on a different plane than practical guidance for living. But metaphorically, it encourages us to love deeply, to commit fully, to prioritize our most important relationships above all else. It suggests that such devotion has value beyond mere utility, that there is something sacred in loving another person with complete abandon. The story also speaks to the ancient Greek understanding of divine justice, which was complex and often paradoxical. Zeus punished Alcyone and Ceyx for their hubris, for calling each other by divine names. This punishment was harsh, leading to Ceyx's death and Alcyone's overwhelming grief. Yet in the end, the gods showed mercy, transforming the lovers into birds and allowing them to remain together. This sequence reveals a worldview in which the gods maintain cosmic order through punishment of transgressions, but are also capable of compassion. Justice and mercy are not opposites, but partners in maintaining balance. Alcyone and Ceyx learned their lesson about the gulf between mortal and divine, but that lesson did not require their complete destruction. Once the point had been made, mercy became possible. Modern readers might find the initial punishment excessive, questioning whether playful endearments really deserved such dire consequences. But to the ancient Greeks, the cosmic order was fragile, maintained only through constant vigilance against chaos. Hubris threatened that order, and any sign of it had to be addressed immediately and decisively. The severity of Zeus's response reflected not personal vindictiveness, but the high stakes of maintaining universal stability. At the same time, the eventual mercy shown to the lovers reveals that the gods were not mere tyrants, but complex beings capable of recognizing genuine love and responding to it appropriately. Hera's compassion in sending the true dream, Aeolus's gift of the halcyon days, the collective decision to transform rather than simply destroy, all of these demonstrate that divine justice in Greek mythology was nuanced and responsive to circumstances. The role of Morpheus in the story is also worth examining. As the god of dreams who could perfectly mimic human form, he was the ideal messenger to deliver difficult truth. The dream he crafted for Alcyone was neither gentle nor comforting, but it was honest. It showed her exactly what had happened to Ceyx, sparing no detail, allowing no room for doubt or false hope. In some ways, this was the greatest mercy, though it certainly did not feel merciful in the moment. Alcyone's continued prayers for Ceyx's safe return were not helping her, but rather delaying her confrontation with reality. The longer she waited in false hope, the longer she postponed her grief. And grief delayed is grief extended. By showing her the truth immediately, Morpheus allowed her to begin processing her loss, painful as that process was. This aspect of the myth speaks to the importance of truth in healing. We cannot begin to recover from loss until we acknowledge that the loss has occurred. Denial, while a natural initial response to overwhelming pain, eventually becomes an obstacle to healing. Alcyone needed to know that Ceyx was dead before she could decide how to respond to that knowledge, even if her response was to choose death herself. The involvement of so many gods in the story, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Aeolus, Hypnos, Morpheus, reveals how interconnected the Greek pantheon was. Each deity had specific domains and responsibilities, but they all worked together, or sometimes against each other, to shape mortal fates. No single god controlled everything, and even Zeus, the king of Olympus, operated within a system that included other powerful beings whose opinions and actions mattered. This divine complexity mirrors the complexity of the natural world and human society. Just as the weather results from the interaction of many different factors, so too did mortal fates arise from the combined influence of various divine powers. Alcyone and Ceyx's story required Zeus's wrath, Poseidon's waves, Hera's compassion, Morpheus's truth-telling, and Aeolus's final gift, all working together to create the narrative's arc from happiness through tragedy to transformation. The setting of the story in Trachis is also significant. This was not Athens or Sparta, not one of the great power centers of ancient Greece, but a smaller city-state in a mountainous region. Ceyx and Alcyone were important in their local context, but not major players on the world stage. This ordinariness makes their story more relatable. They were not heroes like Hercules or Achilles, not engaged in epic quests or legendary battles. They were simply rulers trying to do their jobs well, and lovers devoted to each other. Yet their story became legendary, passed down through generations, remembered long after the names of many seemingly more important figures were forgotten. This suggests that what truly matters in life is not power or fame, but love and devotion, qualities that transcend specific historical circumstances and speak to universal human experiences. The physical description of kingfisher birds, with their bright blue and orange plumage, adds a visual dimension to the myth. These are not drab, easily overlooked birds, but creatures of striking beauty, their colors almost impossibly vivid. This beauty can be read as a reflection of the love that Alcyone and Ceyx shared, a love so bright and pure that it could not help but manifest as physical beauty in their transformed state. Kingfishers are also remarkable for their hunting technique, hovering above the water before diving rapidly to catch fish. This behavior might be seen as symbolically significant, suggesting vigilance and patience, the same qualities that Alcyone demonstrated during her long wait for Ceyx's return. The kingfisher waits, watches, and then acts decisively when the moment is right, much as Alcyone maintained her vigil, and then, when she found Ceyx's body, acted without hesitation. The nest-building behavior of kingfishers is another detail, rich with meaning. These birds typically nest in burrows or crevices near water, working together to create a safe space for their eggs. This cooperative nest building mirrors the way Alcyone and Ceyx built their life together in Trachis, creating a kingdom that was prosperous and just through their combined efforts. The eggs themselves, carefully tended during the halcyon days when the winds are calm, represent new life, continuation, hope. Even in a story centered on death and loss, there is this element of renewal, suggesting that love creates life, that relationships produce something beyond themselves that continues into the future. As we reflect on this ancient myth in our own time, what meaning can we draw from it? What relevance does a story about Greek gods and transforming into birds have for modern people living in scientific age that has largely moved beyond belief in anthropomorphic deities? The answer lies in recognizing that myths are not meant to be taken as literal historical accounts, but as profound explorations of human experience encoded in narrative form. The story of Alcyone and Ceyx addresses questions that remain as urgent today as they were 3,000 years ago. What is the nature of love? Can relationships survive death? How do we cope with devastating loss? What makes a life worth living? In our contemporary world, where relationships are often treated as disposable, where commitment is frequently conditional, where love is sometimes reduced to mere chemistry or compatibility metrics on dating apps, the story of Alcyone and Ceyx stands as a powerful counter-narrative. It presents love as something absolute, transformative, and eternal, a force powerful enough to reshape reality itself. This does not mean we should all plan to follow our partners into death, of course. The literal actions of mythological figures are not meant as behavioral templates. But metaphorically, the story asks us to consider what it means to love with complete devotion, to make our relationships central rather than peripheral to our lives, to prioritize connection over convenience. The modern reluctance to commit deeply often stems from fear of loss. If we do not allow ourselves to love completely, we reason, then losing that love will hurt less. We maintain emotional escape routes, keeping parts of ourselves in reserve, protecting ourselves against potential devastation. But the story of Alcyone and Ceyx suggests that this self-protection comes at a terrible cost. By refusing to risk everything, we guarantee that we will never experience everything. The depth of Alcyone's grief was matched by the depth of her joy, and both were possible only because she loved without reservation. There is also something to be learned from the way the gods responded to the lover's devotion. While they initially punished hubris, they ultimately honored genuine love. This might be interpreted as suggesting that the universe, or fate, or whatever forces govern existence, responds to authentic emotion and commitment when we live and love genuinely. When we commit fully to our values and relationships, there is a kind of alignment with deeper reality that brings its own rewards. The transformation into birds specifically, rather than some other form, carries additional significance. Birds are creatures of freedom, able to move between earth and sky, symbolic mediators between the terrestrial and celestial realms. By becoming birds, Alcyone and Ceyx gained a kind of liberty they had never possessed as humans, even as wealthy and powerful humans. They were no longer bound by political obligations, social expectations, or the heavy weight of mortality. This transformation can be read as representing the way love, at its best, liberates us. True partnership should not feel like a cage, but like wings, enabling us to become more fully ourselves, to reach heights we could never attain alone. Alcyone and Ceyx, despite losing their human forms, gained something precious in exchange. They gained the ability to remain together without the complications that human existence inevitably brings. The annual recurrence of the halcyon days also speaks to the cyclical nature of grief and healing. Loss is not something we experience once and then move beyond. It returns season after season, brought back by anniversaries, memories, unexpected reminders. But just as the halcyon days bring peace to stormy seas, our recurring encounters with grief can also bring moments of calm, of acceptance, of appreciation for what we had, rather than only sorrow for what we lost. For those who have experienced the death of a loved one, the story of Alcyone and Ceyx offers a particular kind of comfort. It suggests that the bonds we forge in life are not simply erased by death, that love persists in some form even when the beloved is gone. Whether we interpret this literally, as the ancients might have, or metaphorically, understanding that those we love remain alive in our memories and continue to influence who we are, the essential message remains the same. Love transcends death. The scientific reality that kingfisher birds exhibit devoted pair bonding behavior adds an interesting dimension to the myth. These birds do indeed work cooperatively, share parenting duties, and often remain together for multiple breeding seasons. The ancient Greeks, observing these behaviors, created a myth that explained them in human terms, attributing human emotions and experiences to the birds. But in doing so, they also revealed something true about themselves, their values, their understanding of what makes love meaningful. Every culture tells stories about transformative love, about devotion that survives separation, about couples reunited against all odds. These stories appear in every corner of the world, in every historical period, because they address something fundamental about the human condition. We are social creatures who form deep attachments, and those attachments are central to our sense of meaning and purpose. When we lose someone we love, we face an existential crisis. The story of Alcyone and Ceyx, and others like it, help us navigate that crisis by suggesting that love itself is the answer, that devotion is its own justification. The element of divine mercy in the story is also worth emphasizing. The gods could have simply let Alcyone drown, allowing the tragedy to reach its natural conclusion. Instead, they intervened, transforming both lovers and giving them a new form of existence together. This mercy was not earned through any specific action, but was granted in recognition of the authenticity and depth of their love. This might be interpreted as suggesting that the universe is not fundamentally hostile or indifferent, but contains the possibility of grace. Terrible things happen, losses occur, tragedies unfold. But within and beyond the suffering, there may be unexpected gifts, transformations we could not have imagined, new forms of being that preserve what is most essential even as everything external changes. The role of Alcyone as an active agent in her own fate is also significant. She was not a passive victim waiting to be rescued, but someone who made decisive choices. When Ceyx decided to make the dangerous voyage, she argued against it. When he refused to change his mind, she asked to accompany him. When he refused that as well, she accepted his decision while maintaining her own position. And when she discovered his death, she chose her response without hesitation. This agency is important because it suggests that even in the face of divine will and cosmic forces beyond our control, humans retain the ability to make meaningful choices. Alcyone could not prevent the storm that killed Ceyx, could not reverse his death, could not change the god's punishment. But she could choose how to respond, and her choice, to join him in death rather than continue alone, was honored by the gods with transformation rather than simple destruction. In this sense, the story is empowering, despite its tragic elements. It suggests that our choices matter, that our love matters, that the decisions we make about how to live and love have cosmic significance, even when we are merely mortal beings in a universe populated by gods and powers far greater than ourselves. The contrast between the storm that killed Ceyx and the calm of the halcyon days is stark and deliberate. The storm represented divine wrath, chaos, destruction, the raw power of nature unleashed without mercy. The halcyon days represent divine grace, peace, protection, nature harmonized and made safe. Both are aspects of the same reality. The universe contains both storm and calm, both punishment and mercy, both tragedy and redemption. This duality reflects the Greek understanding of life itself as containing both joy and sorrow, success and failure, connection and loss. They did not believe in uninterrupted happiness or perpetual suffering, but in cycles, in the constant movement between opposites that characterized existence. The story of Alcyone and Ceyx embodies this cyclical view, moving from happiness to tragedy to transformation, from life to death to a new kind of life. The specific mention of 14 days for the halcyon period is also noteworthy. 14 days is 2 weeks, half a lunar month, a period long enough to be significant, but short enough to be special. It is not permanent, but recurring, not eternal peace, but seasonal respite. This limitation makes the gift more precious, reminding us that peace and calm are to be appreciated precisely because they are not constant, that we value tranquility more when we know it is temporary. In our own lives, we might think of the halcyon days as representing those precious moments of peace in the midst of chaos, those unexpected periods of calm when everything seems to align, when relationships feel effortless and love flows freely. These moments are gifts to be recognized and cherished, all the more valuable because we know they cannot last forever. The legacy of Alcyone and Ceyx extends far beyond ancient Greece. Their story influenced Roman literature, medieval romance traditions, Renaissance poetry, and continues to inspire artists and writers today. The phrase halcyon days has entered the English language as an idiom, meaning a period of peace and happiness, often used nostalgically to refer to an idealized past. While many who use this phrase may not know its mythological origins, they are nonetheless participating in a tradition that stretches back millennia. This linguistic legacy demonstrates the power of myth to shape culture in ways that persist long after the specific religious context has faded. We may no longer believe in Zeus or Poseidon, but we still recognize the emotional truth encoded in stories about them. The myth of Alcyone and Ceyx survives because it speaks to something timeless, because every generation finds in it reflections of their own experiences with love and loss. In contemporary adaptations and retellings, the story is often updated with modern sensibilities while retaining its essential elements. Some versions emphasized Alcyone's agency and strength, presenting her not as a victim of tragedy, but as someone who actively shapes her destiny, even within severe constraints. Others focus on the environmental aspects, using the halcyon days as a metaphor for humanity's relationship with nature, suggesting that peace and harmony are possible when we work with natural rhythms rather than against them. These reinterpretations demonstrate the flexibility of myth, its ability to be continually reimagined while maintaining its core meaning. Each age finds in ancient stories the themes and messages most relevant to its own concerns, proving that great myths are not static artifacts, but living traditions that evolve with the cultures that preserve them. For readers and listeners encountering this story today, the invitation is to find personal meaning in the narrative. What does the love of Alcyone and Ceyx tell you about your own relationships? How do you respond to loss and grief? What are you willing to risk for the people you love? What form might your own transformation take? These are not questions with easy answers, and the myth does not provide a simple moral or lesson to be extracted and applied mechanically to modern life. Instead, it offers a rich narrative terrain to explore, a story that rewards contemplation and emotional engagement, that opens up rather than closes down possibilities for meaning. The image of two kingfishers flying together over calm winter seas is one of extraordinary beauty and poignancy. It represents love that has been tested by the worst that fate could deliver and emerged transformed but intact. It suggests that while we cannot avoid loss and suffering, we can face them with courage and devotion. And in doing so, we may discover that love is indeed stronger than death. This is not a comfortable or easy message. It demands a great deal from us, asking us to love deeply despite knowing that loss is inevitable, to commit fully despite understanding that relationships are fragile, to believe in the transcendent power of connection, even when empirical evidence suggests that death ends all. But it is a message that countless people across countless generations have found meaningful, have returned to in times of grief, have drawn strength from when their own relationships were tested. The story reminds us that we are part of a long human tradition of loving and losing, of finding and mourning, of connecting and separating. Every person who has ever loved deeply has faced some version of what Alcyone faced: the fear of loss, the reality of separation, the challenge of continuing when it seems impossible. And every generation has needed stories that help them understand these experiences, that provide frameworks for making sense of love's joys and sorrows. In this sense, when we tell and retell the story of Alcyone and Ceyx, we are doing more than preserving an ancient myth. We are participating in an ongoing human conversation about what matters most in life, about how to live and love in the face of mortality, about the possibilities for meaning in a world that contains both beauty and suffering. The final image of the story, two birds flying together over peaceful waters, is one of hope. Not naive hope that ignores suffering, but hope that has passed through tragedy and emerged on the other side. Not hope that death can be avoided, but hope that love transcends it. Not hope that life will be easy, but hope that it can be meaningful. As we conclude this exploration of one of Greek mythology's most beautiful and heartbreaking love stories, we are left with an invitation to reflect on our own capacity for devotion, our own responses to loss, our own beliefs about what endures beyond the grave. The answers we find will be personal and individual, shaped by our own experiences and values. But the questions themselves are universal, connecting us to everyone who has ever told or listened to this ancient tale. So the next time you see a kingfisher darting over water, its brilliant plumage catching the light, remember Alcyone and Ceyx. Remember that those vivid colors represent a love so strong that not even death could end it. Remember that the bird's presence near water connects it to tragedy, overcome and transformed into something beautiful. Remember that somewhere in your life, you too may experience halcyon days, periods of peace and calm that come as gifts in the midst of chaos. And remember that love, genuine and deep and committed love, is worth the risk of loss. The pain of grief is the price we pay for the joy of connection, and it is a price worth paying. Alcyone knew this. When she dove into the waves to follow Ceyx into death, she was not giving up on life, but affirming the only life that mattered to her, the life she shared with him. Her choice was honored with transformation, with continued existence in a new form, with eternal companionship. We may not be transformed into birds when we die. We may not experience literal metamorphosis or divine intervention, but we can live and love with the same intensity and commitment that Alcyone and Ceyx demonstrated. We can face loss with courage rather than denial. We can choose connection over self-protection. We can believe, or at least hope, that the bonds we forge in love are the most real and enduring things about us, surviving in some form beyond the grave. This is the gift that the ancient myth offers to modern readers. Not a fairy tale with a conventionally happy ending, not a promise that love will spare us from suffering, but something more profound. The suggestion that love gives meaning to suffering, that devotion transforms tragedy, that connection is the point of existence, even when that connection is temporary and fragile. The halcyon days return every winter, a reminder of Alcyone and Ceyx's love, a promise of peace amid storms, a gift from the past to the present. And every winter, people who have never heard their story still benefit from that ancient gift, still experience those calm seas that allow safe passage. The lovers continue to touch lives, to shape reality, to make the world slightly more gentle and peaceful. Their transformation rippling forward through time in ways they could never have imagined. This is the true immortality that love achieves, not the preservation of individual consciousness or the literal survival of personality beyond death, but the way that genuine devotion changes the world, creates ripples that spread outward, touches lives in unexpected ways, makes future peace possible. Alcyone and Ceyx are dead, but they are also eternally present in the story we continue to tell, in the phenomenon we continue to witness, in the hope we continue to feel when we encounter their tale. So let this story sit with you. Let it work on your heart and mind. Let it challenge your assumptions about love and loss, about commitment and transformation, about what is possible when we dare to love completely. Let it inspire you to your own acts of devotion, your own choices to prioritize connection over safety, your own willingness to face grief as the price of having loved. And if you find yourself by the water during the winter months, during that mysterious period when seas grow calm and winds die down, think of two kingfishers flying together over the waves. Think of a love so powerful that it moved the gods to mercy. Think of a transformation that turned tragedy into beauty, death into life, separation into eternal union. The story of Alcyone and Ceyx is ultimately a story about hope, not the shallow hope that bad things won't happen, but the deep hope that good things matter even when they end, that love is real even when it is lost, that beauty persists even in the midst of sorrow. It is a hope that has sustained humans for millennia, and it remains available to sustain us still if we have the courage to embrace it. If you enjoyed learning about the tragic yet beautiful love story of Alcyone and Ceyx, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Myths of the Night for more fascinating tales from Greek mythology. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced your own halcyon days? Those unexpected moments of peace in difficult times? How do you think about love's ability to transcend loss? I'd love to hear your reflections. Until next time, may you find your own moments of calm amid life's storms. And may you love with the same devotion that transformed two ancient lovers into eternal companions. Sleep well and dream of bright birds flying together over peaceful waters, their wings catching the light, their voices calling to each other across the waves, forever and always together.